Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Kovacs here. Mishnah Yomi continues for Shabbat Re'eh in chapter 7 of Bava Kama, Mishnah Daled Hey today. Now, Mishnah Daled is a bit of a continuation and a corollary to Mishnah Bet about when a thief who stole a shor or a say is liable for the additional 5 or 4 times payment. Gonov al Pishnayim, somebody stole, and this was established by 2 witnesses in court. They saw him do it. The tavach u'macher, but the act of slaughter or selling this animal was al pi eid echad, was based on 1 witness, or al pi atzmo, or the admission of the thief himself. So what happens here? Mishalem tashlume kefil. The thief would have to pay the kefil, the double payment, because we had 2 witnesses to the theft. Einu mishalem tashlume abar v'chamisha. He would not have to pay the 4 or 5 times because there was only 1 witness to that, or it was he himself, the thief himself, admitted in court that he had done that. He would not have to pay. Now, the concept of admitting is pater, is a concept modeh b'knas pater. Someone admits to an act that would bring them to pay a penalty, a knas. They are pater from that. Here the Bartanur and the Kahati explain what would be the case of when he admitted in court, relevant to the witness testimony, to be pater. But they do explain, and the Gemara explains, of course, he still has to pay the keren, the original value. Even if a thief walks into court and he says, yes, I stole the animal, which would make him pater from the kefil. Yes, I slaughtered it, which would make him pater from the 4 or 5. He still has to pay the original value. And this is important because Elul is coming up, and Elul is the time of teshuvah, of admitting our wrongdoings. So when we admit that we did something wrong, we're off the hook from the knas, from the additional consequences of our action. But the damage that we might have done to another human being, another person, that we're not off the hook for that. And we do have to set that right in Elul and in time of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. So important to keep in mind, we're learning Hashkafa, we're learning Musar from what the thief does and admits in Bava Kama. Anyway, the Mishnah goes on, Gonav v'tavach b'Shabbos. What if he stole the animal and slaughtered it on Shabbat? Gonav v'tavach l'avodah zara. He stole it and then he slaughtered it for the sake of idolatry. Or Gonav mishel aviv. He stole it from his own father. Umet aviv. Then his father passed on. V'achar kach tavach macher. Afterwards, the thief slaughtered or sold this animal. Or Gonav v'hikdish. He stole it, and then the original owner gave up ever getting it back, so it belonged to the thief. And then the thief was makdish. He gave it over, designated it to be a carbon, to be an offering in the temple. V'achar kach. Then later, tavach macher. He slaughtered it or he sold it. In these cases, mishalem tashlumi kefil. He has to pay the kefil based on the thief being a thief. He does not pay the 4 or 5 times. So what's going on is if he's slaughtered on Shabbos, we have the concept of kimlei b'derabbaminei. He's liable for execution, so he's not liable for the financial consequences of that act because he's basically under the death penalty instead. And if it was avodah zara, the same thing, that is a death penalty. If it belonged to his father and then the father passed away, now he has a portion. Maybe he owns it entirely, or at least he owns a portion of the animal. So then when he later slaughters or sells it, he's pater from the consequences of that. And if he was makdish it no longer belongs to a private individual. And what the Torah actually tells us is it was gunav mebeit ish. It was stolen from the house of a private citizen. And then slaughtered or sold, not stolen and then slaughtered or sold of an animal of hektish. So he's off the hook for that. Rabbi Shimon adds, if it's holy items where the owner had to replace it, the thief would still have to pay 4 or 5 times. He stole it from someone who had designated a carbon, but when he designated it, he said, Hare alai ola. This is something we talked about in Nidarim, that when a man or woman says, Hare alai, behold, it is upon me, a certain sacrificial obligation, then even if the animal they were thinking about is gone, they still have to replace it. So when the thief took this animal, the original owner has to now provide a new animal to fulfill his neder, his vow, his hekdesh to the temple. But she'ein chayav b'chiyusan pater. If the animal was specifically designated, hare ze ola, the original owner had said, this particular animal is going to be consecrated, then if a thief takes it, he's pater from 4 or 5 times, because what he's taking is something that already really belongs to hekdesh, to the temple. It's already mamish. This animal is an offering, and there's no backup liability, no achrayus, no responsibility of the owner to replace it, then basically he's stealing from the temple. And again, it was good of Mabeta Ish. That's when he can be liable 4 or 5 times, not when it's stolen from the temple. Now, Mishnah Hay adds some cases where you might have thought he would be chayav 4 or 5 times, but he's not. Somebody sold an animal, but except for 1%. He kept a 1% stake in the animal, 1% ownership in the animal. Or he was a partner in this animal, and then he stole it. He slaughtered it, but it became a nevela. Now, nevela is not the same as treifa. We mentioned a treifa is a pre-existing condition, a medical defect in the animal where it would have died. So that's treifa, you can't eat. A nevela is where an animal died not through a kosher shechita. So it's roadkill, or he did an act of shechita, but there was a mistake, a problem in the shechita itself, and it became a nevela. It wasn't a kosher shechita in the first place. If the animal is totally healthy, it can't be eaten because it's nevela. Or hanocher. Nocher is a form of slaughter where they stab the blood vessels or they slit them up and down instead of side to side. A me'aker is putting the knife behind the blood vessels in question and pulling them forward. We're going to talk about these in chulin, when we talk about shchitat chulin, how to do ritual slaughter in detail. These are not valid ways of shchita, not kosher ways to slaughter an animal. In these cases, mishalom teshume kefil. The thief pays back kefil, the double of the amount he stole. Eina mishalom teshume arba v'chamisha. He does not pay back 4 or 5 times because either he had a stake, a portion of the animal was his. He didn't have a stake because in the other cases, it was not a kosher shechita on the animal, so he's not liable for 4 or 5 times. Mishnah goes on, Ganav Birshuta Bailim. He stole it from the property of the original owner, V'tavachu macher chutz Birshutam. Then he took it out of there and then sold it or slaughtered it. So now, because there's a shnui reshut that's out of the original property of the original owner, it now belongs to the thief enough for kinyan geneva. It's kind of his enough that when he slaughters it or sells it, he's liable. Oshaganav chutz Birshutam. He stole it outside of the original owner's property. It was in the public street, and he picked it up, did a hagbah, did a kinyan on it. He ironically brought it into the property of the original owner and then slaughtered or sold it there. Maybe he pretended to be the owner there and sold it. Or he stole it, doing a kinyan, and then slaughtered or sold it entirely outside of the property of the original owner. In these cases, he has to pay back the payment of 4 or 5 times. He has what's called a kinyan geneva. He acquired the animal through a kinyan enough where he is on the hook for the knas, for the penalty payment. Potter. But if he went into the property of the original owner and there he stole it and there he slaughtered or sold it, he's actually potter. He never had a kinyan, never did a meshicha, a hagbah, never did a valid kinyan, and just standing next to an animal in the property of someone else, even if he did a kinyan there, he's still in the private property of the owner. He never had the kinyan geneva, never owned it enough to be liable for the penalty payment. Of course, again, he would have to pay the keren, the value of this animal that he had made unavailable to the original owner. Yashar kochachem, Shabbat Shalom.